Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ask the ARC. My name is Carly Shortino-Poulter, and I'm the director of the ARC Advocacy Network at the ARC of Indiana. And tonight, we're going to talk about the proposed changes to the family supports and the CIH waivers. Last year, when there were waiver changes, a lot of those changes took everybody by surprise. And well, there were a lot of feelings, rightfully so. And I think that part of having new waiver proposals made this year, everybody's a little bit nervous about what those changes will actually be. And so we wanted to make sure that we were talking with families and going through what those changes are and answering whatever questions there were about them. So from the very beginning, we knew we wanted to do a webinar on those waiver changes, and we want to make sure that you're able to ask your questions. So as we go along tonight, go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those questions as they come along. And I'm also going to say, normally our webinars last about an hour or so. Sometimes they go a bit longer, depending on how many questions we have. I have a feeling we're probably not going to go that full time tonight, but let's go ahead and get started. And so let me start by sharing my screen. So let's start by talking about why this is happening. Well, whenever a state provides home and community-based services, that's the official title for Medicaid waivers. The states have to actually submit a plan to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to provide those home and community-based services. Now, those plans are incredibly detailed. In fact, the new plan for the family support waiver is 323 pages long, and the new plan for the CIH waiver is 358 pages long. And they are very, very content heavy. Those waiver plans detail everything, not only what services are available, but how those services can be provided, what are the exclusions, what's allowed, but also they give very detailed information on who actually qualifies for a waiver. What is the grievance process? How do they assess risks? How are they going to document incidents that occur? And so those plans are very, very detailed. Well, states can submit plans for either 3 years or 5 years, and Indiana tends to do 5 years at a time. But what that means is when a state is writing a plan for 5 years, that means that there is an end date, there's an expiration date for that plan. If you hit that expiration date, it doesn't mean that that plan keeps going until a new plan is in place. It means everything stops. And so it is time to rewrite the family support waiver and the CIH waiver here in Indiana. Now, even though a state may submit a plan for either 3 or 5 years, that doesn't mean that it's stagnant, because states can always submit amendments to make any sort of changes they want to those waiver programs in between those state plan years. So let's start by talking about those family support waivers and the CIH waiver. And the good news is there are no new changes to services. Now, last year, we made some changes to the family support and CIH waivers. For example, we created a service called Career Planning and Exploration. We also added some flexibility to 3 other services to help people with disabilities who wanted to work and be able to get some supports in the workplace. We also changed vehicle modifications to be a lifetime cap to being a cap every 10 years. So last year we made some good changes. And I want to share that all of the services that we have stay the same. Now, that also means they're not adding any new services at this time. And I know that we were hopeful that they would add some services, create some more flexibilities to make sure that people were able to live the life that they want to live. But at this time, they're not adding any new services, but all the services that are currently in place stay in place and stay the same. And considering the climate we're in right now with facing potential cuts to Medicaid and discussions around that, I have to admit, I think that's actually a win because we're keeping what we have, and that in and of itself is a huge issue. Now, as far as other changes go, they're mostly technical changes. And what I mean by that is, for example, when our original state plans were written, um, the agency who oversaw them was called the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. Well, 2 years ago, they changed their name. And so in the state plan, some of the changes are that it's now listed as Bureau of Disability Services, and then in parentheses, formerly known as the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. Not really anything necessarily consequential, it's more of a technical change. There were also references to certain websites and things like that where the addresses changed. They updated those web addresses. Um, so some of the changes are more technical in nature. Um, and really, those are the big changes, believe it or not. But the other big change involves the number of waiver slots that we have. So a slot is well, when a person has a waiver, they are given a waiver slot, and that is their waiver slot for an entire year. Now, that year is not based on a calendar year. That year is not based on the state fiscal year. It is based on when that individual's waiver began. So, for example, if you have an individual whose waiver begins September 1st, that is their slot until August 31st of the next year. And slots cannot be reassigned until the end of that slot's year. So, if we have someone whose waiver year began September 1st, and in November they move out of state, that is still their slot until August 31st of the next year. And so they can't reassign it until September 1st of the next year. Now, sometimes that seems a little unreasonable. If we have somebody who's moved out of state, if we have someone who's passed away, we can't reassign their slot to someone new. But there are also times where that's a good thing. So, for example, let's say we have somebody who's gone into the hospital. Once they're in the hospital for 30 days, they get a letter saying that their waiver has been terminated. And when somebody calls me up with a letter like that, the very first thing I tell them is, do not panic, because I know if I got that letter, I would panic. But the terms that they have to use are that your waiver slot has been terminated. But here's the thing, when you are ready to leave the hospital, or maybe you go to the hospital and you have to go to a rehab center to recover from whatever's happened. When you are ready to leave, your waiver slot is still there, and all they have to do is flip it back on. So that's what a waiver slot is, okay? One of the big changes with these two new plans is that both plans substantially reduce the number of new waiver slots. Now, we're not losing slots, but we're not adding new slots the way we have in the past, or the way that we really need to. So, for example, the state only plans to add between 250 and 325 new CIH waiver slots per year. That's not really a lot. They also only plan to add between 692 and 800 new waiver slots for the family supports waiver each year. By comparison, there are currently more than 8,600 people on the waiting list for the family supports waiver, and a couple thousand people apply for the family supports waiver every year. So if we're only adding between 7 and 800 slots per year, what that means is that the waiting list is going to grow substantially. The other big change to this is that they also reduce the number of slots set aside for priority categories. Now, the family support waiver does still keep the same three priority categories. So, individuals between 18 and 24 who have finished school can request priority status, and they can start their waiver services very quickly. The children of active duty service members or veterans can also request priority status. And then last year, we added a new priority category for the family supports waiver, and that was individuals who have previously been on what is now called the health and wellness waiver. If they stop meeting the level of care required for the health and wellness waiver, but they still meet level of care for the family supports waiver, they can switch from the health and wellness waiver over to the family support waiver without going on the waiting list. Those are all really good things. The problem is they've also radically reduced the number of priority slots they're setting aside for each of those categories. So that's something else to consider. And believe it or not, that's actually the changes in these waivers. But you also have the ability to share your thoughts on this because this isn't stagnant. This isn't a case closed sort of a situation. You can submit your public comment. And here's the thing. The state absolutely must read through every single comment submitted. And then they report those comments and their response in the final submission to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Now, don't get me wrong. They don't list every single comment that they got. They do tend to combine some of them and categorize some of them. But they do actually read every single public comment, and they do take public comments into consideration, and it can actually make a difference. And they have made changes based on public comments in the past. So you can share your public comment about whatever it is that is important to you. If you want to say thank you for not eliminating services, you can say that. If you want to say, hey, this is great, but I think you need to add some other services, and then explain what you want that waiver to do. If you want to talk about, the number of waiver slots that they're going to be freeing up, and especially if you want to talk about that waiting list, you have the ability to do that. And you can do that either by sending your public comment in electronically, and you do that at DDRS waiver notice comment at fssa.in.gov. I will warn you, one of the things we ran into last year is we had some families who were submitting several public comments, and if you do that, one of the things we discovered last year was that basically the state's computer system thought that they were getting spammed, and so they stopped accepting public comment from them. So I will say, if you want to submit public comment, make sure that you're putting that all together and giving that coherent message. But you can also submit public comment by US mail. And if you want to do that, you want to list the specific waiver name, renewal application public comment as who it's to, care of the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services, 402 West Washington Street, number W453, P.O. Box 7083, comma, MS26, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46207-7083. So you can do it that way. And while they would like the specific waiver name in that. So for example, if you are going to submit public comment just on the family support waiver, you are welcome to do that. And you would put family support waiver renewal application public comment. Or you can make it more general and say both family support and CIH waiver renewal application public comment. So you can actually comment on both. But it's important for you to know that you get to share your thoughts on this. You get to tell them what you think. And it's really important to do so. So at this point, believe it or not, I want to go ahead and take some questions. And I know that frankly, this was a whole lot, faster than any of us expected, because I think we were all expecting a lot of changes. And I think we were all a little nervous about what those changes would actually look like. So the good news is there aren't a ton of changes there. But let's go ahead and get to the Q&A. Ask whatever questions you have. I will answer those questions to the best of my ability. And let's see. So no progress. So somebody's asking, so no progress on adding skilled nursing daily as a service under the CIH waiver. That's disappointing. You know what? That's exactly what you want to put in your public comment, because there are individuals who have both developmental disabilities and they have significant physical disabilities. And so they kind of, cross that barrier between those skilled nursing waivers and those developmental disability waivers. And I recognize that they don't always get the services that they need. So add that in there. Explain that we have individuals who actually need both types of services. And so we need to make sure that those things are available to them. What is the number of the priority list is reduced to with a family support waiver, especially from health and wellness to family support waiver? What number are they reducing from? Well, and reducing from gets a little bit difficult, because um, what they are planning to set aside specifically for those priority categories, they plan to set aside 45 slots per year for 18 to 24-year-olds who have finished school. That's not a lot when you consider how many students are in special education. They plan on setting aside 20 slots per year for the children of active duty service members and veterans, and they plan to set aside 100 slots per year for individuals transitioning from the health and wellness waiver to the family support waiver. So if you think that that's an adequate number, by all means say so. If you don't think that's an adequate number, you need to let them know that too. Um, what is the new number for the priority list for the CIH slots? What is the number now and the change in the numbers? So I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm grabbing my cheat sheet here, because I do actually have those written down. And I'm taking this directly from the plans that are published for public comment right now. So right now we have, um, sorry, I know I'm fumbling just a little bit because my pages are all sticking together. Um, so right now as of January, we were serving 8,928 people on the CIH waiver. We have 9,438 slots available throughout the year, so we can still add roughly another 500 or so people to the CIH waiver. Next year, they will go up to 9,451 people they're willing to serve on the CIH waiver. That's only an increase of 13 people. The year after that, 9,475 people. That's adding 24 slots for that year. Then it goes to 9,499 slots. Again, adding another 24 slots for year 4, and up to 9,523 people, adding another 24 slots for year 5. So that's the plan for the CIH waiver as currently written in this CIH waiver plan. So somebody's asking, is there still the rule of age 80 as a parent as an exception to getting the CIH waiver for a child? So when it comes to that, to getting that CIH waiver is an emergency-based waiver. They did not change any of the priority categories for that. So the ways you get that CIH waiver are going to be loss of a caregiver over the age of 80, an extraordinary health and safety risk, aging out of a childhood placement, leaving an institutional setting, or substantiated cases of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And as I was saying, they're going to set aside 13 new slots next year for that, 24 new slots the year after that for all of those 6 criteria, 24 slots the year after that, and 24 slots the year after that. And in all honesty, that is one of our biggest concerns at the ARC is the number of slots that they are opening up to add new people to the waiver. Because we've all, well, I can't say we've all lived through, but many of us remember the days when there was a 10 to 15-year waiting list. I know my son waited for 10 years. I don't want any family to ever have to go through that again, and neither does the Arc of Indiana. That just does not serve anyone. And so that is our biggest concern with all of this are the number of waiver slots that they are proposing to add each year. What are the individuals who can't get a waiver due to the waiting list going to do as they need waiver services so badly? That is exactly the big concern. Um, you can absolutely, try to get medical interventions through your private health insurance. I know that oftentimes private health insurance tends to have limits in the number of therapy sessions, for example, that you're allowed to use per year. So these are genuine concerns, and so you know at the same time, waivers aren't meant to do everything. So part of it is still trying to make sure that you're using whatever community resources are out there, making sure that you're building a good, robust network of support. But then you can also use vocational rehabilitation services. If you're wanting to get a job, that is something that is outside of the waiver. So you don't use a waiver for VR services. So you still have access to that. If you have someone who has mental or behavioral health needs, you can still get what are called MRO services or Medicaid Rehabilitation Option services through your community mental health center. And that can provide some mental and behavioral health support and some additional services through there. But that is absolutely one of the big concerns. My daughter just turned 18. Can she apply for all three waivers? Well, really, you start by applying for the family support waiver. The CIH waiver is really just is an emergency based waiver, so you have to meet one of those emergency categories, but you still start with the same way because even though we call it applying for the family support waiver, it's really applying for developmental disability services in general. So it still all starts the same way. The health and wellness waiver is really designed for individuals who have some pretty substantial medical needs or pretty substantial physical disabilities. So they have a very different focus and they have different criteria for qualifying for that. And so it really kind of depends on what your daughter's disabilities are and what her needs are. But most likely, especially if she's got an intellectual or a developmental disability, she would start with the Bureau of Disability Services, applying in general for their waiver services. And you can do that at beadsgateway.fssa.in.gov. And beads is still BD, excuse me, B as in boy, D as in David, D as in David again, S as in Sam, gateway um, at FSSA, no, dot FSSA.in.gov. Sorry about fumbling that up. But you can start there and you can apply online. They have actually changed that process a little bit. They want you to create something called an Access Indiana account. In doing that, it allows you to save the application and go back to it if you need to. But more importantly, it allows you to directly upload documents through that portal. So for example, one of the things you need to get is a confirmation of diagnosis form. And that's a specific form that the state wants filled out. And then as soon as it is filled out, you can directly upload that form through that system. You can upload your child's IEP. You can upload their most recent psychological evaluation. So instead of having to submit that all or fax it in, you can actually upload it directly. And so it does make a difference to be able to do that. Is pre-vote being eliminated as a service, or is it time limited to 18 months? What are the criteria to continue pre-vote after the 18 months? That is an excellent question, and I'm so glad that you asked. No, pre-vocational services are not being eliminated, but they are time limited to 18 months. Also, for individuals who are between 18 and 24, for them, if they are wanting services, they wouldn't use pre-vocational services, they would use career exploration and planning. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, and I have to admit, I'm pulling this off the top of my head, so while I'm probably about 70% sure this is correct, it's something I would want to double check. I do believe that they have said that there may be some ways to extend that in certain situations. Again, I would have to double check that. So I can't swear that that's accurate, but that's part of what's sticking in my head. But but part of it is what all we mean by pre-vocational services. So if we are meaning exclusively sheltered work where we're paying people less than minimum wage, that's going to be capped at 18 months. And part of that is there is a federal directive to eliminate sub-minimum wage, in large part because it's discriminatory and it's more of a civil rights issue. And it's not that, it's not that we don't want people to work because we do want people to work. But people should be paid a fair wage. And so from the federal perspective, they have been working toward eliminating sub-minimum wage for more than a decade now. And a lot of the sheltered workshops that have been in Indiana, more than half have already stopped paying sub-minimum wage. Many of them have already developed transition plans and have been implementing those transition plans. And we've got some really interesting and unique things that different agencies are doing. So some have opened coffee shops, some have opened popcorn shops, some have focused on entrepreneurship and helping people start their own businesses so that they can work at their own pace and do the things that they're actually interested in. So a lot of different agencies are doing a lot of different things. And so we're seeing some really interesting and exciting things that are coming out about that. But I also recognize that that's something that is making a lot of people nervous. And let's be honest, anytime we've got substantial change like that, it's going to be, anxiety producing. It's going to be something that people are worried about. But I will say too that the state is trying to also make sure that they are bolstering up other supports to help people in those ways. So for example, last year, when they created that career exploration and planning service so that people could learn more about different types of employment that can be out there and different types of careers that could be out there. They added more flexibility into three other services, including things like behavior management, and workplace assistance and extended services to make that easier to provide supports to individuals who are engaged in community employment so that they can try that and get established even after VR services have closed. If they need some extra support, they can get that extra support. How can a new waiver provider develop relationships with case managers who support the IDD population? Well, you know what? We're actually right about at the time where we start seeing a lot of community resource fairs, school transition fairs. And so, one of the things I encourage everybody to do is find those resource fairs in your area and go to them. Find out what's out in your community. Find out what new service providers are out there and find out what types of innovative programs they're doing. The great thing about resource fairs, and the reason that I love them so much, is because instead of making 900 phone calls to figure out who does what, you have them all in one room. And so you can literally walk from table to table to table, talking to the people who work for them, finding out what their programs are really like, and starting some of those conversations so that you can figure out what types of services and supports are available for your loved one. Um, So I've got somebody else asking, this does not improve the chance for individuals to get on CIH, does it? With a frowny face. No, it doesn't. And the way this is written, it really does limit the number of individuals who would be able to transition onto the CIH waiver. Part of the concern with that is we have an aging population. You know, we are going to have more parents who are reaching the age of 80. We are going to have more parents who pass away. And I don't necessarily think that 250 to 325 slots is going to actually meet the needs of Hoosiers with disabilities. Is there any chance when there is a death, they might change the rule to open the waiver to a new person? So one of the big issues with waiver slots is you only have those waiver slots each year. And that's the big concern. Now, this doesn't mean, because remember, this is the first proposal. This doesn't mean that they can't change that. And I think one of the reasons why they have limited it so much is because of those budgetary concerns, especially with that reported $1 billion Medicaid shortfall. And so I think that's been the driving factor with a lot of this. That doesn't mean they can't change it. And even if this goes through, it doesn't mean they can't change it next year or 2 years from now or whenever we have the next budget session either. So my personal opinion is doors are never fully closed. But at the same time, it would be better if we weren't facing that from the very beginning. Is securing an apartment but requiring residential habilitation services considered a priority situation to receive the CIH waiver? Um, so the way I'm reading that is that if somebody gets their own apartment, but they need residential services, and they're not on the CIH waiver, could getting the apartment require that? I don't believe it could. Okay. That doesn't mean that a person can't live in an apartment on their own, even without the CIH waiver. Now, that's going to depend on the individual. It's going to depend on what skills they have. It's going to depend on what supports they use. It's going to depend on what types of natural supports they have, and also what kind of technology they're comfortable with to figure out, to get the types of supports they need to be able to live on their own. But there are people who have family support waivers, who are living on their own in their own apartments and using a combination of both waiver services and non-waiver supports to help them successfully live on their own. I know this is not discussing autism needs, but the changes they are recommending will be devastating to families and providers. This is going to be very bad for individuals. I think you might be talking about the proposed ABA, the amendments to the state plan regarding ABA therapy. And I'm going to say there have been a lot of changes in that very recently. And so again, I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet. As you can tell, I'm in somebody else's office today, and I don't know how to increase the timer on their lights. So forgive me for my lights always going out. But let's talk about the ABA issues that are going on. So there is currently a state plan amendment that is pending. And in this particular case, when we're talking about a state plan amendment, we mean to the Medicaid health coverage state plan. And originally, what they were proposing was to limit ABA to no more than 30 hours per week and no more than 36 months of ABA coverage. And they were going to make that 36 month of coverage retroactive. There have been continuing conversations on all of that, and so there are some changes that are in the works. We won't see a specific plan until Sunday or Monday, but what we are hearing right now is that first of all, there's not going to be that 30-hour cap. Part of what they're looking at is whether or not how to make sure that we're making coverage sustainable, but still meeting the needs of individuals. They're also not going to make that 36-month cap retroactive. More importantly, Even though they are still looking at having a 36-month cap for services, they are going to create a process where individuals can appeal that 36-month cap, especially in extraordinary circumstances, so that there's still the possibility that they could continue to get more than those 36 months. Again, that's still kind of a fluid situation, and we will have a much better idea on Sunday or Monday when they put out some new documentation on what that's going to like. So stay tuned and make sure that you're talking to your legislators and to the governor's office on these issues to let them know what our people's needs are. Because a lot of times it's more a matter of people who don't live this life don't understand what all Medicaid does for us. They don't understand how vital it is to a person being able to live their life and to live their life successfully. So part of it is we need to humanize that so that decision makers have a better understanding of what their policy changes will actually mean in the real lives of people. What qualifies as extraordinary circumstances to access the CIH waiver? Oh, that is an excellent question. And you could kind of hopefully you heard the sarcasm dripping off of that. Because they never fully define it. And so what they're talking about, some of them are very concrete. If you lose your caregiver, that can qualify you for a CIH waiver. If your caregivers are over the age of 80 and there are no other caregivers available, that qualifies you for a CIH waiver. And what I mean by that is if dad is 80 but mom is 78, they're going to make you wait until mom is also 80 years old before you could qualify. It's extraordinary health and safety risk that is very subjective. And there are not clear-cut answers to what constitutes an extraordinary health and safety risk. And so you really just have to try to make the best case possible. I will also say that when it comes to that CIH waiver, the state is also looking at some other things, including, what else are you using? What else are you trying before coming for a CIH waiver? So for example, are you using home health services? If behaviors are an issue, are you using those Medicaid rehabilitation option or MRO services, those mental health services through your community mental health center? Are you using, other resources before trying to apply for the CIH waiver to make sure that the person is getting what they need? And they also want to see if you've got the family support waiver right now, how much of that family support waiver are you actually using? Because sometimes people aren't using their full family support waiver before they apply for a CIH waiver. Now, I know both sides of that because sometimes it's a matter of the person's needs are so high that they can't get service providers to serve them on the family support waiver. But sometimes it's also a matter of there is still room in their family support waiver budget so that they can be using it, and they need to try to do that first. I know both sides of that particular argument, but how do you define that? It's not a clear-cut answer. If the federal government decides to make large cuts to Medicaid, will this affect the 5-year plan in place? Likely yes and no. So first of all, it's not that it would have an immediate effect. It's that the state would have to go in and submit amendments to change that 5-year plan. If the federal government decides to make large cuts, will it affect us? It will. There are just going to be a few steps to make that happen. And that's again why it's really, really important that people are submitting their public comment, that they're talking to their elected officials, whether it's state legislators and the governor's office, or whether that's your congresspeople and your US senators, to explain to them what Medicaid means in real life, how it helps your loved one live their life, how it helps you live your life because your loved one is getting supports that they need. Because really, most people only think of Medicaid as just health insurance for low-income people. They don't think of our folks in any of this. They don't think about Medicaid being what helps somebody, be able to live their life. They don't think of it as services that help them work. They don't think of it as the services that just help them have the life that everybody else wants to have and gets to have. So we need to kind of humanize that. Um, can you help me understand the CIH can't be activated until the individual is discharged from a group home, but can't be discharged without a support plan in place? Are they supposed to leave with no supports and go without anything until the waiver is activated? You have kind of hit upon the chicken and the egg situation, which comes first. And ideally, because yes, there are some regulatory issues that wind up, kind of causing some interference. Because you cannot have a waiver while you're in a group home, because a group home means something very, very specific to the state. A group home or supported group living is an intermediate care facility for the developmentally disabled. And so it is technically an institutional setting. While a waiver is designed to help prevent somebody from going into an institutional setting. So it's an either or. You either have a waiver or you're in an institutional setting. You cannot have both at the same time. Ideally, what is supposed to happen is if you are wanting to leave a group home, the local Bureau of Disability Services should be working with the group home agency and working with the individual and working with the family to have all of that set in place to help make that transition. And it sounds like you're kind of getting caught in a situation where we've got two different sides saying, well, you can't do that until you do this. Oh, but you can't do this until you've done that. And so I know who this person is asking this question. So I tell you what, I'm going to reach back out to you so that we can try to work through this together. And that's one of the other things is sometimes people get caught up in the details, and sometimes they get caught up in the steps rather than looking at the big picture. And so anytime something like that happens, you're always welcome to call us here at the ARC to talk with any of our family advocates to help figure out, okay, how do we actually, stop this from being at a standstill and get this moving again? How do we, help nudge this situation along so that we can help that person, in this particular case, leave that group home and move back into the community with all the supports that they need. Next question. I don't know if this showed up earlier, but what happens to the plan for a high, medium, and low support needs waiver? You know what? I know that those were things that we were absolutely discussing at some point, and I think that the biggest thing that happened was that $1 billion Medicaid shortfall. And so I think that part of what has happened is that they are trying to just maintain the status quo. But you know what? That's what you put in your public comment. If you think that there should be a high, medium, and low support needs waiver, then tell them that. If you think that, the family support waiver is great, but sometimes it's not enough, but we also recognize that not everybody needs a CIH waiver, and so we need that medium waiver, tell them that. Now, do I necessarily think that that's going to change for this particular cycle? No. But do I think that they can amend this within the 5 years to potentially create that? They can. And so those are the things that they need to hear is if you think that's what we need, then you need to tell them that that's what we need. Can you repeat that portal name again? I can. It's BDDS. So B as in boy, D as in David, D as in David, S as in Sam, Gateway, GATEWAY dot F as in Frank, S as in Sam, S as in Sam again, A as in Apple, .in.gov. Okay, I tried to type that answer into the Q&A, so maybe everybody will actually see that. Hopefully so. And you can always go to the ARC's website and find the link there, especially if you go to our waiver changes page, you should be able to find that. Families with a child with significant disabilities, behavior challenges, and a few with criminal record are very concerned that the workshop is going to go away and their loved ones will not be making even a small amount of money. Families are concerned that placing them in a day program will be a setback. And I completely understand that. And so part of it is working with not only their current workshop, but also their entire support team to figure out some options and do a lot of that career exploration and planning. Um, so I know that individuals who have a criminal history, it is much, much harder for them to find employment. I do recognize that. That's where I would also recommend not just relying exclusively on the waiver team for that, but also reaching out to some of the reentry employment providers that are out there to also begin working with that individual. When we have individuals who have significant disabilities or behavior challenges, part of that is also, working with that behaviorist to figure out, okay, what are our triggers? What are some things we need? So maybe it's not working 5 days a week, but maybe it's making sure that shifts are limited to, no more than 4 hours, and we make sure that they have a day off in between shifts. Um, Sometimes it's also that work doesn't necessarily mean 40 hours a week. It can mean all sorts of things. And I've talked to some families where, that was their big concern, is that they didn't necessarily think their loved one could work in a community setting. And one of the questions I would ask them is, do you think your son would be able to match the picture on this can with the picture on the can on the shelf? They're like, yeah, they could do that. I said, guess what? That means they could actually restock shelves at a grocery store. And oftentimes that happens when the stores are fairly empty, and there aren't necessarily a lot of people shopping. So it's not a one size fits all, and it doesn't necessarily meet everybody's needs. And so part of it is we've got to make sure that we are individualizing these discussions, figuring out what does that individual really like to do. So I was talking to somebody earlier today, and they worked with a gentleman who, they tried all sorts of different jobs, and it turns out what he really liked doing was he makes hats, and he's really, really good at it, and he enjoys it. He likes the rhythm of it. He likes the routine of it. He loves the colors of the yarn that he's using, and he's doing a great job with it. And then what they're doing is he's making these hats, and then he is selling these hats at different community events. So he has actually started his own business making, knit caps. Think, especially with as cold as it is right now, making those kind of hats. And he has actually started his own business. And he is someone with significant disabilities. He is somebody um, who has very limited communication skills, and sometimes he has behavioral issues. But this is something that he can do. It's something that he enjoys, and it's something that he can do at his own pace. And he is now a small business owner as a result of it. So part of it is we've got to open our minds to what employment means and what options are actually out there. I heard the rally on Monday is canceled. Is this true? It was for the ABA changes. I've got to be honest, I don't know if it is canceled or not. It was the Autism Society of Indiana who was um, helping to organize that. So tomorrow I would go ahead and I would call ASI to ask them if it is still on or not. And part of that could very well be because the situation is continuing to evolve. So we weren't the ones behind the particular rally. So call the Autism Society tomorrow to find that out. Um, So the next person, the problem we have faced with using the family support waiver funds is that there are no available staffing to provide the services. That's the truth. It's been very frustrating to get the services in place. I completely understand, and you're not wrong. I mean, think about it. The state itself refers to the workforce shortage as a crisis because there are not nearly enough direct support professionals to be able to meet needs. And I know that the state is also trying to develop some new programs to attract more people into this industry and try to recruit more people as direct support professionals. So, you know, You're right. It is an absolute crisis. We are that understaffed. Um, but I do think that there are some initiatives that are going on right now to try to address that. I don't know how long it will take to do that, but it's something that everybody has a vested interest in. And I'm also going to encourage you to go to those community resource fairs and school transition fairs that may be in your area. By the way, just because a school is having the school transition fair does not mean that you have to be a student in order to go to that school transition fair. They are open to the public. And frankly, if an agency is at a resource fair, they are looking for business. Otherwise, they got no business being there. That is my personal opinion. But it's a great way to start finding some people and saying, hey, do you guys actually have people who are available and who could actually start serving my loved one? I will say, after school and weekends are the hardest time to get services, just to be perfectly honest with you. But there are still some options available, but you're right. It is really, really difficult. Somebody saying it's critical that families contact their state and federal legislatures about these issues. They must hear from them to make a difference. And it really does make a difference. When they start getting hundreds of phone calls telling them about what's going on in our lives and letting them know that, hey, Medicaid actually means a lot to us. Letting them know how many people they have on Medicaid in their district and what that actually means in people's lives makes a huge difference. Sometimes people will send in a form letter where they just put their name at the end, but it's already written for them. Those aren't necessarily effective because it looks like a form letter. But telling your story, explaining what Medicaid means in your life and in the life of your loved one, that makes a huge difference. Um, Another Medicaid paid ABA service has been changed, noted in the IHCP provider modules. FSSA changed ages to receive ABA to end at 20 and updated in Bulletin 11/29/2024. Contrary to the Indiana court's ruling in 2019, finding age limits does not follow ADA rules, spearheaded by attorney Tom Blessing. Um, you're right about the class action suit that was filed in 2029. Um, I think that limiting the ages of ABA is also something that is being changed right now as well. Because you're right, that was absolutely one of the things that the court ruled. So I think there is still a lot of things in motion when it comes to ABA coverage. So I don't think that is done by any stretch of the imagination. Um, so somebody is asking, can you tell us how to make public comment? On our waiver page, waiver changes page, probably tomorrow, because I forgot to tell them to already do this. We're gonna put some links in there so that you would be able to email or find the email address of where you submit public comment, and also find the actual mailing address. If you would rather like write it out and put it in the US mail, you can do that too, and we'll be able to have that on our waiver changes page tomorrow. Um, have they mentioned if they will require a certain number of hours per week in order to qualify for Medicaid? Um, if you're talking about ABA, I think the number of hours that they are going to require or have guidelines on, I think that is all still in flux. I think that is all still in discussion right now. If I have totally misunderstood your question, if you could put something more in there, I would appreciate it, and I will absolutely answer more. Somebody says, I have guardianship of my autistic brother. He does not live with me. He lives with our older brother. Could his CIH waiver be affected with these new guidelines? If he already has the CIH waiver, he is going to stay on the CIH waiver. So right now, nobody is losing the waivers that they have. I will say that for the health and wellness waiver, the state is working on new and updated level of care requirements. None of that has been finalized yet. And part of what they're looking at is what is developmentally appropriate for the individual's age. So for example, if you have a 2-year-old, the fact that they cannot bathe themselves should not be considered in whether or not they qualify for a health and wellness waiver, because no 2-year-old can bathe themselves regardless of disability. So those are some of the things that are being discussed. But when it comes to the CIH waiver or the family supports waiver, those levels of care are still going to be the same. They are not changing those at this time. I say at this time, mostly because that can always change, but I'm not hearing anything about that either. Okay. But if your brother has the CIH waiver, as long as he continues to meet level of care, and more importantly, as long as he continues to qualify for Medicaid health coverage, meaning that he his income is still below the income limits, his assets are not more than $2,000, with a few exceptions. That tends to be why people lose their waiver, is more because they stop being eligible for Medicaid health coverage. And oftentimes it's because something has gotten screwed up with money. And that is normally something that is fixable. And it's just a matter of fixing it. Um, have they mentioned if they will require a certain number of work hours per week in order to qualify for Medicaid? Oh, now I understand what you're talking about. Thank you. Um, those are discussions going on at the federal level, to reinstitute the idea of work requirements. Now, in the past, when Medicaid has had work requirements, people with disabilities were often carved out of those work requirements. Um, right now, those discussions are very preliminary. There's nothing kind of concrete. I know in the past, when Medicaid had work requirements, it was typically 20 hours a week. I have no idea what it will be or if it will be, because especially at the federal level, right now everything is fair game. Everything is being discussed. At the state level, yes, they're talking about Medicaid, but at the state level, nobody wants to hurt people with disabilities. And so they're very mindful of that. At the federal level, right now, everything is on the table. So make sure you're reaching out to your congressperson. Make sure you're reaching out to Senator Young and to Senator Banks to tell them, that you have a loved one with a disability, and they receive Medicaid health coverage, but also those home and community-based services through Medicaid, and it is essential for them to be able to live their life. But like I said, in the past, people with disabilities were excluded from those work requirements. Sometimes when we have caregivers who are also on Medicaid because they're caring for their loved one, there have been some ways to kind of work around that. No pun intended. But right now, it's all too up in the air. There's nothing kind of concrete, and right now all the discussions are so preliminary. There's not a consensus forming yet. Okay, and so that's where I'm going to make a shameless plug and also encourage you to sign up for our e-newsletter if you don't already get it, and to sign up for our legislative alerts so that you can make sure you are up to date and getting the most accurate and up-to-date information that's out there. Now, typically speaking, we only send our newsletter and our action alerts once a week. There are times, especially with the legislative action alerts, if something is about to come to a vote, we may send out something to say, hey, this is coming up for a vote tomorrow. Make sure you're talking to your legislature. Make sure you're talking to the members of the committee. But we're not trying to flood your inbox with spam either. So I'm going to make a shameless plug and encourage you to sign up for those, just so that you can keep up to date with what's going on. Um, so somebody's asking, off topic, but what about the Section 504 thing? So, you're opening a can of worms. That's okay. So, what they're talking about is that currently there are 17 states who are suing the federal government regarding Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. If you're not 100% sure what Section 504 is, if a student in school doesn't qualify for an IEP, but they still have some needs, like let's say we've got a student with diabetes who needs to be able to, you know, uh, you know, eat in class whenever their blood sugar gets low, or maybe we have somebody who has an extraordinary number of doctor's appointments, so they need they need to have more than the typical number of absences, or they need some accommodations but they don't quite need an IEP. They would have what's called a 504 plan. Well, that refers to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. um, but Section 504 is also what a lot of other accommodations for for example, for individuals with disabilities who are in college, or individuals who may be in the workforce, or who may need different supports and accommodations. A lot of times those fall under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. We have 17 states who are currently suing because the Biden administration added gender dysmorphia as a disability. And so those states are suing not only to remove gender dysphoria as a disability, but they've also asked to find that that Section 504 is unconstitutional and completely remove it. Now, there has been a lot of discussion about this, and I think that some of the individuals weren't necessarily expecting to completely end Section 504 and don't want to end 504. But there is a court date scheduled for February 25th. That is the next time that they have to come together on this. And so one of the things is I would pay attention and listen to what happens on February 25th, the next time they go to court and have a hearing on this, and stay up to date on all of that. Um, so so that's something that we're monitoring, and we're monitoring very closely. And I think that this is the very beginning. So it is not something that it's something that I want to monitor, but I know that we're early enough in this process that by the time this all resolves, it will look very, very different from today. I just don't know how yet. Okay. Um, so somebody's asking, I was late. I missed the first part of this. Am I able to see the recording after? Absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked, because all of our Ask the ARC webinars are recorded, and we post them on our YouTube channel within a day or two. So that if somebody misses an Ask the ARC, that way you can watch it. And especially sometimes our webinars are kind of content heavy. That way you can go back and rewatch it and pause as you need to. So it'll be on our YouTube channel fairly quickly. And that's just youtube.com/ the Arc of Indiana. And so yes, it will be up. Um, so all right. I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully, this made you feel a little bit better. Like I said, the good news is services are not changing; they're all staying in place. The big concern is simply the number of slots that the state is going to open up for new people to join the waiver. Um, but most importantly, you want to submit your public comment so that your voice is heard. Thank you all so much. I want to check one thing really quickly because somebody just put something in, and it was just somebody saying thank you. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.